And you can share your screen when you're ready.
All right, thanks, Brett. Thanks, Tim. Let me see if I can make this work. Okay, how are we doing? Can we see this?
Yep, you're all good.
All good? All right, perfect, great, excellent. I guess when I show this, I can't see the chat box anymore. So you'll have to just cue me if you see that, Tim.
Okay, will do.
Okay. All right, guys. Thanks, Tim. Thanks, everyone at Tech Nation for having me here. So I know that Tim mentioned that we're going to talk for 45 minutes and then have Q&A. I think it would be good for anyone to ask questions as we go. It'll help keep it a bit more interactive. It's difficult to do some of these things in person, let alone over Zoom, but we're getting used to kind of this new reality. So I'll start with a quick introduction. So my name is Jason Dolvain. I'm currently the founder and CEO of a company called Wishslate. I'll talk to you a little bit about that in a minute. But for that, I'm going to kind of cover a couple of things today. One, just give you a little bit of insight into my journey as an entrepreneur and what I've been doing over the last, I guess now 20 years. And then, what I'll do is, through that journey, certainly have learned a lot of lessons. And when I reflect back, I think about even just what I would do different and what I would do moving forward. And so what I tried to do is capture that into some lessons. And so we'll talk a little bit about that. And as I mentioned, any questions, just keep coming through and we'll keep it interactive. So, So I've been an entrepreneur, I guess founder of multiple tech companies now. SPL was my first one, Wishslate is my next one. Previous to SPL, I had another sort of company which was more services related, still in the tech space. Over the years now, I've raised over $100 million of financing from high net worth individuals, which are angels, some people that have been very successful and made their money, usually in kind of the tech business also, from venture capitalists and the public markets, both in the US and Canada. I led the company, which was SPL, my previous company, to an IPO, and then I served as the public company CEO until it was acquired in 2019. I myself, as part of growing the company previously, one of our strategies was to acquire weaker competitors. And so we did successfully look at several different acquisitions and then closed a few of them. So we bought some companies, merged with them along the way, and that contributed to our growth at SPL. We acquired companies, but we also got acquired, which was by Enghouse in 2019. And along the way, I've had multiple exits for investors. We've helped investors exit through IPOs, through an IPO. We have helped them exit through raising secondary money on the public markets and get some investors out if they wanted to sell their stock. And we've also, been acquired, and so we've had an exit through an acquisition. And so, multiple ways of actually getting investors to get their money out over time. I studied computer science at Carleton University and executive education at Harvard Business School. So, initially basically started with Carleton University computer science, really tech background for all intents and purposes. I interned at Nortel, Entrust, Corel. I think 2 of the 3 are still around. And they usually tended to be, what a lot of you guys might be used to, 4 to 8 month type terms that I did at them. And then right after sort of school, I took a job full time at Entrust Technologies. And I think we lasted maybe 2 months there when we left Entrust, when I left Entrust and I started actually SPL. And so it was right after university, after my bachelor's degree, and we started SPL, which, you know, at the end of it was a media and telecom software as a service company. But we actually had started a company to be kind of an internet platform for devices. You know, at that time, the internet was really prevalent on PCs, but it wasn't really to be seen anywhere on different devices. And so that's kind of where we had started. We eventually focused in on kind of developing a media or a television solution or a video solution for multi-screen devices. So it was really about, you know, streaming video over the internet to different devices. So that kind of ended up becoming the application. So different from where we started, and really got focused over the years, and then ended up over there. It was financed by angels and VCs. You know, Greylock, which is you know, probably one of the world's best well-known VCs today. They've funded Facebook and LinkedIn and Airbnb. You know, they also invested in us and had led our Series A. This was a long time ago. They certainly had other wins at that time. Did the IPO on the Toronto Stock Exchange, 2019. As I mentioned before, acquired by Enghouse Networks, and then 2020, I started Wishslate, which is a new startup to change the way we gift. So, kind of two or three words on SPL, or 2 or 3 sentences on SPL. You know, as I said over here, it was really a video streaming platform. So I just went to their website and took a snapshot over here now. You can see it says SPL by Enghouse in the top left. And really the platform ended up becoming a cloud IPTV platform. So we sell to companies like Rogers, like Shaw, like Comcast, and other sort of major operators. And we help them deliver their video streaming software or video streaming solutions to consumers worldwide. Wishslate is kind of what we're doing now. It's a consumer app. It's really an easy way to see friends and family wish lists so that you can save time and not have to guess and try to figure out what gift to actually buy someone. So it just makes life a little bit easier. And it's really a consumer app that can be downloaded off the App Store. So you know, any of you guys are curious, you can check that out off the Apple App Store. So let me talk about some of the lessons over here. So first is really the start. You know, at SPL, we really bootstrap. Bootstrap means we actually started funding the business by ourselves. So that really means that we have to keep, we fund it ourselves, we have to keep expenses really, really low. And what we're really trying to do is sort of make progress in the business so that we can find that first customer, develop that first MVP or minimum viable product, and then be able to start to get some users on it so we can really validate it. And it's so important to be able to actually do that early on, as opposed to think about raising financing, only because it really keeps you grounded. It really allows you to stay focused on sort of the basics and what you got to really get done to create the first elements of what could be a successful business moving forward. And, you know, we're bootstrapping, and the secondary sort of impact of bootstrapping ends up being, one, you're grounded, but two, the longer you bootstrap, the more equity you're actually going to maintain in your company moving forward. And so, you know, how do you really get started? I mean, you know, for us, when I actually started the business, I was out of school, probably, you know, in a similar position to where a lot of you guys are, you know, or maybe 2 or 3 years away from where you guys might be, depending upon what year of school you're actually in right now. And you know, we really didn't have any experience. We had no clue about business whatsoever at that point in time. And so how is it that we kind of, you know, do things, and how do we kind of progress from there to finally end up where we did, right? Obviously, we didn't know any of that. But at that time, and now looking back in hindsight, it really is about, you know, we did the basics, right? And so we don't have experience, but at the bottom line, it's like you got a product and you're selling it, right? You need to get people to buy into the value of it, and you're learning. So that's the very, very simple kind of iterative cycle, which is you need to have a product that you're going to sell someone on the value of it, and you're going to learn from them whether they like what they see or they don't see, right? And now you're actually creating value for that. And so, it's really important to just stay very open. It's really important to be focused on the basics around like pick up the phone and talk to people. Call them, DM them, kind of in today's world, right? With Instagram and Facebook and everything like that. But you've got to be able to talk to customers or talk to users, and it's really, really important to do that. And don't be afraid. Don't be afraid to sort of make those big calls, right? And pick up the phone and just call anyone. I mean, my most of my success at SPL, and even now, sort of as we're moving through Wishlate, has been because I wasn't afraid to pick up the phone and call. And the reality is that I'm older now, and I feel like I've got more baggage than I was your age, because you had no fear at that time, and that's a really, really good thing, because sure, there's a lot of times where it's not going to work, but there are many times where it's actually going to work. And a great example of this was Greylock, which was a venture capitalist that kind of invested in us. I didn't know any of them, and actually, if you talk to any venture capitalist, they will tell you that 99.9% of their investments start with a very warm introduction from someone that they actually know, and then they will introduce kind of the company. And so for me, I just cold called, and I just stayed persistent on it, and I was able to actually get them to answer the phone. I remember one of the partners actually calling me up and saying, "Hey, Jason, you are one of the most persistent people, and so I'm just calling you back." And then he talked to me, he said it was interesting, and then he put me in touch with one of his other partners, and next thing you knew, we were closing a $12 million US transaction with them. So, you just never know what happens, and there was no reason for a company like that to be investing in a kid out of school, right? So it's possible, and for that one story, I probably got on a dozen where those types of basics have just worked for me. The other thing that you need to kind of be focused on around here is it's about executing, right? I talk about don't be afraid to call out, but don't be afraid to just do things and start getting stuff done. Because as you start getting stuff done, you realize what you're failing at, what's not working, and what's actually working. And if you don't start getting stuff done, you're going to basically be in a position where you're sort of spiraling downward, right? Which is like, if you don't get stuff done, it's obviously not going to work. And if it's obviously not going to work, you're going to get disappointed, right? The other way is, well, if you're getting stuff done, which is just execution, right? That's a formal word for saying it. If you're executing on it, then there's a 50% chance it's going to work, and you're going to see whether it worked or it didn't work, or at least you're going to learn from it. And guess what? When something actually works, it gives you more confidence, right? So you basically put a lot more energy back into actually getting stuff done again, right? So again, stick with some of the basics in terms of being able to get stuff done. So once you actually do that and you've kind of got this mindset, we need to get our first customers. And obviously we can kind of cold call, we can get out there, we can try to basically sell people on their value. We have very little money when we actually start a company in the beginning to actually go and spend on marketing and flying around and stuff like that, right? And so, one really good strategy that's worked for me in the past and continues to work all the way through is to use other people's marketing money. So you really need to kind of think about, who else in the ecosystem of your particular product or service may benefit from, working with you or doing business or being a partner for you. And to the extent that you can actually do that, you can actually use their marketing dollars. An example of that when I started SPL was, we again didn't have any money, right? A few kids out of school, basically. And so we actually were doing kind of this platform for devices, this application or internet platform for devices. And so we said, well, who's actually doing any software for devices? And at that point in time, there was a community of kind of real-time operating systems or operating systems that actually would work on all these different devices, right? I mean, that's evolved since then to like Linux now. But at that time, it was like WindRiver and Microware and a few other folks out there who were focusing on just building those device software or device operating system. So we said, okay, well, we're going to be an application platform on top of that. So let's go partner with those guys. And for them, they can actually showcase our product on top of their operating system. And it will be a nice kind of a demonstration of what their operating system can actually enable in terms of applications that people can actually create. So, they gave us free space in their trade show booths, and they gave us free space in some of their own sort of seminars that they were actually doing. And we were able to have a growth strategy which was use their customer base that we can actually sell to and allow and basically grow from that using that approach. And that actually got us some of our very, very first customers, and not just got us some of our very, very first customers, it also created credibility for us, right? So, at Wishlate, which is kind of my current company right now, we're really early on it, but I'm thinking about some of the same things, which is like, obviously we have an app that allows people to actually make wish lists. And so you can go and see your friends' wish list and social, but really what's on those wish lists? It's products from different merchants, right? So it could be like Best Buy or Target or Columbia or Sport Check or Indigo, one of these kind of merchants. So I'm spending a lot of time thinking about, is there a way for me to partner with these merchants so that I can basically get the app in front of more consumers out there, right? I also think about, is there more ways for me to partner with like a university where, kids have so many needs, right? Or university students have so many needs. They want to buy stuff, right? They need to actually have different things for school. They just need stuff. So, it's a good idea for them to go build something like a wish list of some sort and be able to put it in front of their parents so that they get exactly what they want, right? So these are just some examples of the kind of ecosystem that we start thinking about, because really what I'd like to do is figure out how do I actually use partners and their consumer bases to be able to attract people. And that's the most cost-effective way to be able to actually do these things. And your first wins, that first cohort of users is super important, right? Because you got to figure out how to actually bring them on, and then are you really adding value to them? And then you got to just keep making sure that you keep building product so that you can add more and more value to them. And in the industry, it's called product market fit. Okay, so we started the company, we got the right mindset, we were focusing on the basics. We figure out how to actually get some of our first users and keep adding value to them, because once we start learning from them and we do it cost effectively, we can keep improving the product. At some point, people start thinking about financing, and they go, well, I should go raise some money for my particular business. And there are really, and actually we did a lot of this. I've done a lot of this along the years, and it can be a great idea, and sometimes it can be a terrible idea. And so it's really important to be kind of careful and to really understand what you're really trying to do over here. So there are kind of like three things to this equation, right? Which is really around financing and what happens. So one, you're trying to raise money. Two, because you're going to raise money, you're likely going to give up some equity, which is you're going to give up 8% of your company. And three, you're bringing on a partner, right? So, everybody talks about investors, giving you money, but the reality is that every investor will tell you that they're there to give you advice, and they're there to help you build your business, right? Sometimes it can work, sometimes it can't work. So you really have to consider all three of those things. I think on the money front, you want to raise enough money so you don't have to go back to the well, but not too much. So you really need to think about that balance, because if you end up raising too little and you run out of that money, your next round of financing that you actually do, depending on the progress you made, could be quite expensive. And by expensive, I mean you end up giving up a lot more of your company, or you end up giving up more equity. If you raise too much, you end up giving up more equity in your company right up front, right? So you got to figure out really what that balance is and think through that. On the equity side, my view is try to maintain as much equity as you can and bootstrap your way to keep your expenses low and bootstrap your way to some of those first milestones, right? And the first milestones are really around getting real users using your product and validating some of the value that you're actually going to be providing to those particular users or customers, right? However you look at that. And then the last piece really is, and this is probably the biggest pitfall, is around the investors that you actually bring on. So remember, and especially you guys are going to be young, and if any of you guys decide that you're going to go on to be entrepreneurs, to start your own businesses, you're still young, right? And for me, when I was your age, I was confident about a lot of things. And I was also, I was still humble, and I wanted to listen to what people were saying, right? And so investors or CEOs of other companies, these were all kind of like people that I would look up to, and I would be like, wow, if they're saying something, it should be right. And and the reality is that, you know, there's a lot of good input and advice that a lot of people can give to you. There are few, very few, that will apply the right advice to the context of your own business. And so you need to develop that own confidence yourself in terms of being really humble and taking advice, but being able to figure out what you're actually going to apply and what you're not going to apply. Because at the end of the day, you know your business best. But there's also kind of a cohort in the whole investor world and the advisor world that could take you off course. And that's the biggest issue, or the biggest pitfall that you got to really watch out for, is if you get the wrong advisors, at the end of the day, you're accountable for your business, but the advisors may actually take you in a direction where they've asked you to do something because it worked somewhere else, it may not be the right thing for you, or you know, they've just got other, they have got other motivations on their side, and it could be something like, hey, their fund is coming to an end and they need to basically get an exit, or, you know, they need to collect management fees of some sort, and so, you know, there's reasons for them to take their money out or keep their money in. So you just have to be aware of some of those things, and be cautious. And at the end of the day, as I said, you're bringing on a partner, so you need to be selective. And it's always a challenge because, you know, if you really need the money, then you're going to take the money from, you're more likely to take money from anybody who gives it to you. But if you manage it all the way through and bootstrap as long as you can, keep your expenses low, and put yourself in a position where you made good progress around your milestones, you open up yourself to a situation where you can be more choosy about who you actually end up partnering with. Okay, the next thing really is perseverance. So nothing's easy. This whole journey is not easy. It's actually one of the most difficult journeys that you'll ever embark on if you want to really be an entrepreneur. You know, there are lots of lows. I'd say probably more lows at times than highs. There are lots of hardships and obstacles that you hit as you move forward, and you're going to have to overcome them somehow. And so, you know, things kind of fall into like 3 or 4 different buckets. You know, you lost a sale. Okay, that didn't go well, right? So you want to kind of optimize it and figure out how you're going to actually improve on that. But, you know, one of the other things, and there's operational issues like that, right? Or, you know, your server crashed because your product wasn't working, right? If you do a tech company, or if you're doing a manufacturing company, you know, your manufacturer kind of shipment or whatever it is got damaged or something, right? So there's issues that fall in that category. But then there are issues that fall in the category of reinvention, which is, man, we've really been at this thing for a certain amount of time, and it's not working. Our business model's not working. You know, we don't have a lot of value that we're actually adding to users. We don't have power users on this thing, or we don't have customers that really love our product. And so those are really, really difficult ones to sort of navigate through, because you got to figure out, what are you going to really do? And it's hard, especially when you put your soul and all this hard work into actually building something. You really want it to be successful. But maybe you need to tweak it. Maybe you need to reinvent it altogether. And you really need to be honest with yourself as to how you're going to really do that. And then eventually, you know, what you'll find is, even if you're making money, right? Even if you're making money, you've kind of stalled, and you're not growing anymore, or you're working really, really hard for every single customer. And that's really when you need to think about getting some momentum behind you, right? Because there are lots of characteristics in your business, whether it be people, product, how you're doing your marketing, how you're acquiring users, who your users really are they the ones that are actually taking you forward? Are they not? Could be your investors, could be lack of money. There could be various different things, and you got to solve for that equation, right? Because you are going to you'll stall at some point, and the reality is that, you know, the winning companies are going to be the companies that can actually find the wind behind their back, right? They can get some win in their sales and kind of get moving, where all those things in terms of like user acquisition and getting new users and getting people to actually do, they start to become easier. but they won't be easy unless you can solve the situation where you start to actually see people. You start to actually see people not using the product as much, or being really difficult to sort of give you orders, and you're just working too hard, right? And so you're gonna have to figure out how to do that and optimize it on that front. So, anywhere from day-to-day hardships to you're gonna have to reinvent your business model, and you're gonna have to reinvent your product, to challenges of growth at some point. And I think that it's not really at some point. I think there's several milestones that get created and several steps that get created, and you're gonna find that you're gonna have to do things to sort of drive momentum behind it every single time. So, it can be pretty disheartening along the way, and you need to kind of persevere as you're moving through this. And that's a really important part of being an entrepreneur. Okay, so this is kind of my last lesson here, and something that I did not do right all the way through. And by the way, like a lot of things that I've talked to you about, there's tons of mistakes that I made along the way. So, a lot of this is about trying to capture some of those things and share it with you. So on the culture front, culture seems like a big word, and a lot of times it's actually used incorrectly. And I didn't really care about this, or didn't really give any thought to this when I started. And the reality is that if you're not explicit about it, you end up where you end up. So, when we talk about culture, it's really a way of working, right? What do we really expect from our employees? What do we really expect from ourselves? What are the values that we want to really kind of drive our business forward around? And once you define kind of what those values are, you define what the behavior is that's going to be associated with that value, you come up with your culture. And being explicit about that and driving that from day one, I feel is just so important, right? Because you can then, like let's just say, we come up with something as basic as we're going to really move fast or execute fast, right? I mean, well, if you think about something like that, and our value is, our value is, it's okay to fail, right? As long as we learn something from it really, really quickly. Well, if you want to do something like that, then you need to make sure that you put the processes in place to be able to execute on that. And then you need to be able to look and make sure that you are figuring out when that's not working, and then be able to actually course correct as soon as possible, right? If one of your things is about, hey, we really want people to feel empowered and feel accountable about things, then you need to solve for that. You need to look for that all the way up front. And if there are people on your team that are not going to meet those things and you can't correct it, you need to get them off the bus, and you need to basically figure out how to have a team that's going to be aligned with those values as you move forward. For me, I didn't really think of that as much, and I was implicit about it, and I didn't put it down. I write it down, and we got into, especially when we started acquiring companies, you start to actually acquire people from different walks of life, from different geographies, and everybody's not really aligned with a core set of values. And I think if we were explicit way earlier on, then we would have been able to get everybody aligned with that and more in groove swing than what we than where we actually end up. And the reality is that later on, it's so much harder than doing this right up front. And there's probably a significant cost to it along the way also. That's hard to quantify, but I'm sure it's very expensive. Okay, so I'll stop that. Maybe open up to some questions.
Sure, we have a couple questions in the chat. I'll just go to the first one. Thanks, Ben. He is asking, so he's not very experienced at networking. So what's a good strategy to practice and ramp up to be a better networker in the future?
I think there's lots of different ways of doing that. Obviously, I think that there's I consider myself really an introvert, right? So if depending on whether you were an introvert or an extrovert, I mean, it comes easy to some people. Some people it doesn't come that easy to. So you're gonna have to train yourself a little bit on that. But also, it comes back to just going out and doing things, right? So you can go to events. If I don't know where you got where Swen's based, but I mean, depending on where you're actually based, look at local business events you can actually go to. There tends to be so many different kind of like accelerators and entrepreneurship events, and even different meetup groups that are actually happening for pretty much every single topic. So go out there in person and start to actually meet people, and don't be afraid to go in front of them. You can also use LinkedIn. LinkedIn's a fantastic tool. Add a message if you're going to contact anybody, because one of the last things that I like is just seeing a request for LinkedIn without kind of a message as to what exactly they would like from me or what do they actually want. I'd rather you be really honest and say exactly what you want than just sending me kind of a blank LinkedIn, right? So you can use that. That's another sort of great networking opportunity in today's world that we certainly didn't have before. Another one really is, kind of the equivalent of cold calling, right? I mean, today everybody is, obviously you can use the phone, but also everybody's on Instagram and Facebook and all these other sort of, chats, whether it be Reddit or whatever it is. And so you can go and DM people, and chances are that, look, you won't be very successful. You may not be very successful in starting off, but just stay at it, be persistent, and you'll be amazed as to how many people actually want to talk to you. And the interesting thing is that something magical happens when you start talking with a couple of people. They'll know a couple of more people, and then they'll know a couple of more people, and you start to be able to actually expand your network a lot faster.
Awesome, thanks. And one thing I'll add to that, just from my own experience, and one thing my grandfather always challenged me on, is where are you volunteering? So showing people your skills at work and volunteering in those equivalent roles for nonprofits that you care about.
Great.
There's another question here, also from Ben. How do you come to the decision to shut it down and decide that things aren't working if perseverance isn't getting you past the necessary steps to success?
So I think there's probably a set of warning signs along the way, right? For any problem, I think you need to kind of break it down into sub problems and then try to solve those things. Today in our world, we have so much data, right? We can depend on so much data than certainly 20 years ago. So I think that as you break it down into smaller problems and you start to actually solve for them, you need to move really fast. And I always say to even my team, which it's better to fail fast than what's not working, so that you're closer now to trying to figure out what's actually going to work. So, I think at the end of the day, if you're doing a lot of those things, then you're going to have to make those decisions, right, as you move forward, which is if you're trying to solve a problem, you're failing fast, which is meaning you're executing fast. You're getting data and you're seeing whether it's working or not. Hopefully you can iterate through that and improve it. Or at some point you kind of look at it and say, no, you know what, that's not working. I got to drop it and I got to move on to something different. So I think that there's a series of sort of success and failure cases and metrics that you do need to kind of track. And at some point, there's an overwhelming amount of data or evidence around that you got to look at and say, maybe I'm just in the wrong path altogether, and I need to pivot, or I need to take a left turn on this and figure out something different. So that's kind of the whole kind of product side of it. I mean, another side of it, which a lot of sort of startups end up with, is I think if you don't have your burn in check and you don't have enough runway from a financing perspective, you are going to get your back against a wall at some point in time, and you may not have any other option but to kind of fold or put more money into it. And at that point, you need to decide whether there's enough there, and you think that you can actually go and put more money behind it, or are you actually putting good money behind something bad at this point? So I don't know if it's helped, but just some ideas.
Awesome. Okay, next up is Jan, and they say that they've been working on building an app that's an educational resource. The direct customer would be teachers, and during meetings we've had a lot of enthusiasm, but have been struggling to secure them onto our testing team. Do you have any tips for putting together your first testing group?
Yeah. So I think you bring up a great point, which is lots of people will tell you they love your product, but to get them to love your product, to actually get them to pay you for it, it's like two different worlds altogether. And so you're kind of trying to bridge the gap over here between somebody who's a direct customer, a potential candidate for testing, and then for them to actually go and test it on that front. I think a lot of it's just about you having a discussion with them. And there's kind of this like really fine balance, right? You need to know what you're in there for. You're in there for when you actually will have a conversation, right? You're not in there for somebody to hear somebody say how much they love it, right? And to actually see that enthusiasm. You're there to really convert them. And so I think you've got to like really think about what your question pattern is around how you're going to really convert somebody. Because if you've got an hour of somebody's time and you demonstrate your product and everything like that, and you go through it, they may love it and everything like that, but you haven't gotten into the question around, well, will you test this product, and what will keep you from testing this product, and do you have the time to test this product, or why would you not test this product, right? So I think you really need to get into that type of conversation with them so that you can uncover what exactly is holding them back. There is a book called Mom's Test. And there is also a book called 4 Stages to Epiphany. And both of those books, I think every entrepreneur should read. And it's really around customer development. Mom's Test is about how you're going to ask the right questions to get the right answers around that. And 4 Stages of Epiphany is really around helping you through that customer development process. So it seems like, Jan, seems like you're at that stage right now where you're trying to figure out how to get your first customers. And I would suggest go buy both of those books. You could probably get the Kindle versions of it for like less than $10, but they'll help you a lot.
Great. Next is Elian, if I'm pronouncing that properly. What are the biggest things you consider when building your team in the early stages of a startup?
So there's kind of a couple of things, right? So on one side, I talked about sort of culture and values, right? So you really need to figure out what your values are and what you're looking for in individuals. And I can't stress enough how important that is to do upfront, because it's going to give you a very strong filter on what you're actually looking for in the beginning stages. And really, some of those first startup employees are going to end up becoming folks that stay with you for quite some time, right? Or at least until through some tour of duty. I don't know how long that's actually going to be, depending upon who the person is. The other piece that you need to sort of think about is, when you're in a startup, every employee is actually wearing multiple hats. There isn't such a thing as like, oh, I'm going to do a very specific job, or I'm going to be a specialist in this. So the more you can find people that are more generalists and really match your values and have strong aptitude to learn and solve problems, and then with some technical skills around that, or depending upon whatever the job is, you're going to do a lot better hiring those type of people than hiring specific specialists to do certain jobs. That'll come later when your company's a lot bigger. But as a startup, you want people that are generalists, match your values, and are going to be able to wear multiple hats.
Awesome. And since it's HR related, I'm going to just skip over Mitchell's question and come back to it in a minute and go to Jaden's. And they ask, how much autonomy did you give your first managers when starting a company? How did you find the right balance between micromanaging your vision and delegating tasks?
So early on in SPL, which was my previous company, I was actually very poor at this. What you realize is that you're kind of a bit of, you started this thing, you're kind of controlling a lot of things, and so you want to really kind of keep your fingers in everything and make sure that it's perfect, right? But that's not scalable, and so in essence, what has to happen is you do have to kind of step back around that. So I feel like I'll come back to, again, the values, right? So there's like two things. There's values and there's trust. So on the values front, I think that you got to hire the right people, or you got to be really clear about what your values are, and that is kind of your framework for making decisions, right? And people need to know that, right? So if another important part is for a company is you want to get things done. So I think that if you match your values, that's going to help you. Sorry, if an employee matches the values or is aligned with it, that's going to help them create more trust with you. Because at the end of the day, I want to be able to know that I can trust my employee, or I can trust my people that are in the company to do the right thing, right? So that comes with two things. One, are they going to get it done? Are they going to persevere? Are they going to persist through it and overcome any obstacle to do that? So that's like an aptitude, right? I mean, you got to make sure that people are do that. And do they keep getting stuff done? And when they actually run into certain challenges, are they making the right decisions that are aligned with your values to solve those challenges, right? So I think of that as a package that each person needs to sort of drive towards and execute on. And that helps me trust them more. And as that happens, I'm able to increase trust in that particular person. And as I increase trust in that particular person, I give them more autonomy to do whatever they actually want to do and to make more decisions. And that way you actually push decisions down to them as opposed to every decision coming to you, right? So that's kind of like, we're building incrementally. Now, another approach, an opposite approach to that could very well be, I'm going to let them know what my expectations are, what my values are, and how they need to do things. And I'm going to give them all the autonomy in the world, and I'm just going to let them go do it, right? And then I'm going to start to actually see how they're actually doing and decide whether I'm going to keep that or I'm going to start to actually reduce that autonomy and work with the individual to figure out that we need to improve certain things. And maybe it does, and maybe it's going to work out that way. Or maybe it doesn't, in which case we have to make a decision whether that's the right fit for the company or not. But what you need to be very careful about, I think the second part of the question is, how do you find the right balance? Your job as a founder over there is to actually drive the company forward and move the needle in the business, right? And so there's a lot of stuff that doesn't move the needle in the business. So if I sit down there and I'm trying to create a graphic for the last 5 hours, well, my time might be better spent trying to basically acquire users or figuring out how to generate revenue, right? So I think you have to really think about that. But depending upon, if you're just one person in the company, you need to do all those things, right? But as you move forward, you need to think about what really moves the ball forward. And I always used to talk about, I still talk about my team, this concept of activity versus progress. Your focus should be on things that progress the company, not just activity that just spins around, doesn't move the needle.
Great, thank you. Now back to Mitchell, who says, this is a hard question, but how do you know that an idea for a business is a good idea?
So, at the end of the day, the best validation of any idea is whether your users and your target customer actually like it or not. So, you need to test it, right? And there are varying degrees of kind of testing this thing. Back to the two books that I suggested, Mom's Test and 4 Stages to Epiphany. You need to go buy those also, because they will walk you through a customer development process, which actually allows you to test your idea as quickly as possible in your customer development process by talking to people, by understanding what it is, and by asking the right questions that will help you validate that as quickly as possible. And obviously there are different tools of doing this and how you actually approach it, but generally the concept is in there. So I would actually suggest doing that and follow the process in there, and it'll help you through kind of customer interviews and things like that, really assess your idea as soon as possible.
Excellent. So the last question on here so far, if there's not any more left after this, is from Rishab. Once again, sorry if I mispronounced that. How do you effectively scale?
So, I mean, it's a pretty generic question. I talked about some of this in, I believe it was Jaden's question around, scaling yourself, right? And I would say, creating kind of empowerment, accountability, and alignment with your cultural values from, every single individual in the company, right? From the lowest levels in your organization. And if you do that, then that kind of translates and has, it kind of amplifies its effects as you move up to managers and everybody else in the organization. So that's really about scaling your organization, right? But when you talk about effectively scale, there's so many different sort of aspects to it, right? So it's like, how do you scale revenues, right? How do you scale users? And each of those are going to, you're going to need to consider those. But really, it comes down to what I talked about in one of the lessons around perseverance, around the fact that there are going to be times in your business where you're not scaling, and it's just so hard to scale. And when you are at those points, you really need to think about whether it's a product market fit issue, or whether there are some other operational issues that we actually have. And you have to, go in there and try to basically figure out what that problem is and fix that so that you can get momentum behind you. So I think there's scaling the business and then there's scaling your organization. Obviously, they go hand in hand. But you need to kind of consider both of those.
And Brett snuck a question in there. He's asking, do you hire co-op students?
We do. So, I've always been a big believer in students. Obviously, I was a student when I started my own business, but over the years, even my last business, we had gotten around to hiring several co-op students and interns every single term. And that worked out for us really, really well, because, I would say that a lot of our kind of leaders in the company came from those first students that we actually hired. And they matched our kind of cultural values and aptitude that we were looking for, and they went on to do really, really well. And so that success gave us a lot more confidence to really look at students as contributors that can have a significant amount of impact in the company. And so I've always been a believer in actually hiring students and giving them a lot of responsibility so that they can have a lot of impact. Just like we would any other person in the company. And a lot of that has worked in that they've actually stepped up to it because they were able to gain that responsibility and ownership sooner, and then be able to actually go and translate that into doing better and bigger things for us. So, at Wishslate, I'm of the same mentality.
Awesome.
Hiring students down, yeah.
And there's another question in here from Elian. When you started your first company, what was your end goal? Were you aiming to be acquired? When I started my first company, I don't really think I even thought about an exit. The thought was to actually build a good business, and then, the exit would actually take care of itself. And I certainly was a believer on that all the way through. And I think that's what you should think about, right? I mean, I don't think you start with what's the exit for the company at the front end.
you think about how you're going to build a business and where you want to take that and what value you're going to create for your customers or your users and whether it solves a real problem, right? And how you're going to monetize that. Now, along the way, you go and get investors and you raise financing and other things. And when you do that, that's a typical question, right? Because investors want to actually get their money out. And so, funnily enough, I used to just give the standard answer that investors needed to kind of hear, which was, yeah, you know what, we could do an IPO, or we could actually, company XYZ could acquire us, and those are potential exits that you can actually get your money back with. And outside of that, I didn't really think of it too much on a day-to-day basis. I thought about just running the business and building it. And when things actually went well, we had opportunities to do a public offering, and we had opportunities, or actually we had suitors that came to us and gave us a term sheet themselves.
I think we have time for one final question, and it is from Rashab. I would like to ask if there's anything you wish someone would have told you about being an entrepreneur.
So, one thing that, I guess maybe a couple of things here, right? So I wish I was more confident in the beginning years, okay, around myself, right? And my own gut. And I always was as I went through, but I also got swayed by external advice and by advisors and board members, right, that I would bring on. And I didn't quite know how to interpret, what they were actually saying. And so, in hindsight, I mentioned this in my presentation also. Actually, when I was talking about investors, right? But I mean, it goes for any advisor too, right? And I think there's a really, really strong chance that when someone who's accomplished so many different things and is an advisor to you, talks to you about certain things, it may impact you, and you may believe that that is exactly right. It very well maybe, and there's some really, really great advice that we get from everybody that's around us. But at the end of the day, it's our job as entrepreneurs to be able to figure out how to interpret that and how to apply that. And you may apply all of it, you may apply part of it. And it took me a while to figure that out. And I guess maybe it's kind of like, it's advice, right? And you can do what you want with advice. It wasn't that they were telling you to do something. And I think that there's probably a distinction there. And it's good to get clear on that sooner than later.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much, Jason.
Questions, guys?
It was really great for you to kick off our inaugural series here. And I just want to share the link for next week's session in the chat box. So if you're interested in hearing from Dave Savory and Daniela Pico from Ripen, which was a startup out of the University of Victoria, they're going to chat about like starting to build your team from the ground up. Daniela is going to talk about it from the side of being an employee for a startup right out of school, and Dave's going to talk about being the founder and building his team. So we invite you all back next week, and we're looking forward to it. So thank you all for attending.
Nice. Great, thank you.
Thank you.
Jason, Brett here. Just wanted to say again on behalf of Tech Nation, thank you so much for lending your time and expertise. It was really appreciated.
Yeah, my pleasure. I think it was fun. Some good questions, which always makes for a nice interactive session.
Definitely. Well, we'll be in touch. Thank you so much. Have a great afternoon.
Thank you, guys. Bye now.
Cheers.